of all the things that we have going on, really, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, there are lots and lots of details, lots and lots of mitzvot, lots and lots of Hashqafah, philosophy, important discussions that need to be had. There is a somewhat, seemingly technical detail for us to tackle, and that is that this coming year in North Israel is a Shnat Shemitah. So it actually does have some interesting implications. There are lots of them. We could, in fact, we might do a series of shiurim on a couple of crucial topics. One of them is money and loans. What happens if you've borrowed money and now the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, comes up. In theory, this at the end of the Shemitah year, any loans that were outstanding and hadn't been paid basically get cancelled. So not at the beginning, it's not on the first of Tishrei, Rosh Hashanah, but rather at the last day of Elul. How to handle that in the event that it does apply. And lots of us make little loans that we haven't paid attention to. In theory, if I bought something for you and put it on a credit card, I borrowed the money, you borrowed it from me, and then the Shemitah could potentially cancel it. So we have a bit more of a pressing issue. Not that it's for this particular Rosh Hashanah per se, because a lot of people do buy fruits from Israel around Tu B'Shvat. A lot of the dates that you can find, you know the dates in Costco are from Israel?
I didn't know.
You may not have noticed that. Yeah. You need to know that.
I
You make the special bracha
Shumar Mas.
after you eat it.
Do you need to do Shumar Mas?
No, that's been done in Israel.
Okay.
It's under two different Hashqafot. The Israeli Rabbanut and the, I believe it's the Levi.
What about Jaffa oranges? I'm always curious.
I don't know if it's so much if it's a breed or a particular brand. I'm not such an expert on citrus fruits. But, one or the other, if they do come from Israel, it's the kind of thing you need to know and be sensitive to, and you can usually find out where it came from. If it went through a big warehouse or a big wholesaler, generally speaking, the Rabbanut is on top of it. In some cases it is, in some cases not, but usually that's a relatively safe bet. So what happens if, not this particular Rosh Hashanah, I'm not concerned, because let's say we bought dates or pomegranates from Israel. They don't grow too many pomegranates in America. Now they do, because it's the health fat, antioxidants, and whatever. So we have the this whole concept of Shemitah. Now, it doesn't apply to things that were planted before Rosh Hashanah. This is an interesting discussion. We tend to hold 30 days out. So what had been planted before Elul, pretty much, before the beginning of the month of Elul, would not be considered something that grew during the Shemitah. In other words, it struck root, even though it produces fruits during the Shevi'it, it wouldn't necessarily be considered something that that would have potentially problematic consequences for what we eat during the rest of the year. It gets a lot more complicated though if you happen to be going to Israel for the Haghim, and if not for Rosh Hashanah or for Kippur, or maybe for Sukkot. You might be going for weddings. Hopefully we'll have vacation time that we can spend there, and there it's a real big balagan, how exactly this works out. So there are fruits and vegetables that are exported from Israel. I don't know, it might also be one of the few countries that's a net exporter of food as opposed to importing, because they do produce, over very little geographical area, they produce quite a bit of food. But I think just with the flour and the meat, they're probably a net importer, but they did export quite a bit, especially with Gush Katif. They used to do, I think, $60 million a year from there alone. So the question is, what happens if something comes to me from Israel? It could be something as innocent as going to a supermarket, not realizing that they imported this particular fruit or vegetable, or spice for that matter, from the Holy Land. And if that's the case, there are a bunch of potential issues that we need to be aware of. This is going to be much more immediate in the case of herbs, leaves, things like that. I don't know how many of them if they export at all, but if you're in Israel, anything that grows within a couple of days obviously could potentially be a problem. So mint, basil, thyme, oregano, anything that comes relatively fresh. Vegetables, so root vegetables, tomatoes, things that are planted and don't take that long to reach maturity, are going to be the first items on the list. And the question is, what are the issues? Well, issue number one is that the Torah tells us that all the fruits, all the harvest of the Shemitah is le'ochla, it's to be eaten, and it's not limkira, it's not for sale per se. In other words, when something grows during the Shemitah year, it has some interesting restrictions and limitations on it. I'm not allowed to sell what my property or my land produces during the Shemitah year, but rather it kind of belongs to the entire Jewish nation, which sounds familiar with the tragedy of the commons. Probably remember the essay. Tragedy of the Commons, an essay that was written. They point to it as one of the early precursors of the environmentalist movement, where I forget who wrote it. The author, it was in Scotland, if I remember correctly. The author was making the case that the public grasslands in Scotland had been badly degraded. Why? Because they were public grasslands. In other words, because they didn't belong to anyone, they belonged to everyone. And so naturally, all the Scottish really liked land. Everybody was grazing, but they were overgrazing particular lands, and they were preferring to keep their pasture for the dry months of the summer, for the tough months of the winter. Everybody would make use of whatever is public and out there, and they would only then resort to grazing their own pasture, like when absolutely necessary. So what happens is naturally they were depleting the quality of the grass and the soil year after year, until at some point, so the clever name, Tragedy of the Commons, because these lands are called common lands, and because anybody who wants can make use of them as long as you don't destroy them. So people would graze, you have problems. So what happens in the Shemitah year is that my orchard or my vineyard or my field of grains is not, it doesn't belong to anyone. So it's not that it belongs to everyone, it just doesn't belong to anyone, so to speak, which is to say, I'm entitled to water the land. I'm entitled to water my fruits, my vegetables, my grains, my crops, etc. We'll talk about what else you can and can't do, but most immediately, I'm not allowed to plant something, water it, and then sell it for money. We don't. The Torah tells us, instructs us not to take the harvest of the Shemitah year and use it for business. So what? So everybody can come and take as much as they want? Also no. Also not the case. This isn't the tragedy of the commons, where basically if that were the case, what would happen? Think in terms of economics, supply, demand, what happens when you give away stuff for free, there would be a run on the farms. Everybody would say, okay, let's wait for Shkia or for Tzitak Haghim. Not on the night of Rosh Hashanah because it's Yom Tov and it's a sur to go and harvest things, but I know what you were thinking, Yuan. You would wait in this year until Motzei Shabbat. In Israel, Rosh Hashanah is 2 days anyway, right? So 2 days of Rosh Hashanah, 1 day of Shabbat, and in theory, I could go ahead and plunder, well, it only apply to things that had already been planted during the Shemitah year, but I could go ahead and take whatever I want from any farm. And if I know that he can do it, then she can do it too. I was Yohan and Barbara, now I've got competition. So everybody would run and take whatever they could. That's not the way the Shemitah works. You're allowed to take with you as much as you and your dependents need for the next 24 hours. I can take up to 2 meals worth of grains or fruits or vegetables or whatever, but I'm not allowed to come with a truck and basically harvest what you've been growing yourself. Nor are you allowed to harvest it before I get there and go ahead and sell it for profit. So Sophia is saying something very clever, and I appreciate the depth of what it is that you're saying. What you're saying is, you mean to say that the fruits and vegetables that we're not allowed to sell aren't going to make it to the market because it's a sur to sell them, right? And if it's forbidden to do this, naturally no one would do it. Which is generally never a safe assumption to make. No. People will be planting things and growing them and selling them for profit. The fact that it's forbidden doesn't necessarily prevent them from doing it, but there might be a halachically permissible way to do it. We'll talk about that in a second. So, I can't collect things in wholesale quantities. I can only collect and bring into my house as much as we need for the next 24 hours. And so if I have a fig tree, how many figs can I and my family eat? 2 pounds, 3 pounds, 4 pounds, whatever it is. So I can go ahead and pick out, take as much as I can fit in a small basket. And what we're going to plunder, we'll basically take for the next 24 hours.
Was there a kind of control system for that? Like who can monitor?
Okay, so
because in the time of demand,
this is the real Hashqafah behind the shiur, and why I have both topics are related to the Shemitah. We'll talk about Rosh Hashanah in a kind of roundabout way. The Torah doesn't put controls in place, right? There are very few places where the Torah tells you, Hashem commands you to do this, and just so you don't think you can do this, this is also forbidden. I'll give you 2 examples that we use when we refer to things like this. These ancillary interdictions, or things the Torah kind of predicts your behavior. It's like a game of chess. Game theory is really the area of psychologists who fall into. I tell you, during the Shemitah, loans get canceled. What are you going to say? Right? Because Uriah works hard for his money. You say, wait a second, loans get canceled during the Shemitah? who in his right mind would lend money in the 6th or 6.5 year if he knows at the end of the 7th year, before the beginning of the next one of the cycle, all the loans are canceled? Why would I be so, let's say, foolish as to lend money to someone in good faith when I know that he or she could just back out on the last day of the Shemitah year cycle, so at the end of year 7, and I might not get my money back. And here the Torah tells us, first of all, you should know that if you have loans and someone owes you money, the loan gets canceled at the end of the 7th year. And, just so you don't think that it's okay to think this way, it says, there shouldn't be this evil, wicked tendency in your heart. What are you going to say? The Shemitah year is getting closer and closer, and your eyes become narrow. In other words, you start squinting and judging with scrutiny. The Shemitah year is coming. You're borrowing money because you don't have any. That doesn't really inspire much confidence in your ability to pay it back. Now, if I lent you money in the beginning of the 1st year, you told me you wanted to buy some trees and plant them, and after the 3rd year you can start selling the fruits and make the money back, you pay me back the principal, and this way you can go ahead and make a living, I would say fine. Here, it's not going to happen in a matter of a couple of weeks or a couple of months. So the Torah tells you, yes, I told you that these loans get canceled at the end of the Shemitah cycle. At the same time, I'm also telling you that it's evil, it's wicked for you to go ahead and preemptively shut the loan faucet to anyone who might need the money in anticipation of the cancellation of the loans. In other words, don't change your behavior, which is a little bit difficult to say, right? Don't change your behavior on account of the Shemitah, because people will still need the money, and their need is no less legitimate if it's in the 1st year or the 5th or the 7th. Whether or not you're going to get the money back is this step of emunah that you're kind of required to take. And we'll talk about the controls, because you see here, Chazal intervened. The Torah tells you these loans are canceled, and Haghim said, so, but if you do that, people are going to not lend money, and then what happens is that you've locked the door before those who need to borrow it.
So
Right?
why does the Torah even prevent it? If there is no way for us to usually the Torah only forbids something if there is a way to overcome that instinct. So if there is so much, if it's so impossible to overcome that instinct,
right,
that
we try
even
not.
Chazal intervene.
We try not to pigeonhole the mitzvot and say this only applies in an ideal world. Do we do it? We do it. We generally try to avoid saying something like, that was true in those times, or this only applies to people who are on such and such a level, I'm clearly not there, because that's a very easy way to exempt yourself from everything.
But money changes people.
Not just money, lots of things.
No, but dealing with money and transactions, like the Torah, like the Chachamim understand that people, parnasa is a big thing. And
Yeah, it's not only that. I don't know how many people, when push comes to shove, I don't know how many people can actually withstand the trial. If a guy comes knocking on my door and he says to me, Rabbi, I mortgaged my house, I'm about to lose it, I desperately need help, and I'm in the hole $50,000. Assuming I had the money, right? Put yourself in that position and say, I know this guy has 3 months to pay back $50,000. I could give him the whole thing, we could split up amongst a bunch of people. But we know that it's going to be practically impossible for him to pay back. Do I lend him the money? Which, by the way, is the fulfillment of a biblical commandment. The Torah tells you that someone's poor and needs the money, you lend him. It's a mitzvah, not just to give a gift, by the way. Don't think you're not doing a mitzvah if you haven't given it as tzedakah. You want to give someone a gift and say, here, take it as a gift, it's great. Shmuel talks about this and he says, sometimes somebody's a little bit stubborn, doesn't want to accept it, fine. Give it to them as a loan, and then you can cancel the loan, that's also a mitzvah. It's a backhanded gift. But there is a mitzvah, there's a biblical commandment to lend money to someone who needs it. So just because I don't have the money to give you as a gift doesn't mean that I can exempt myself from giving. Not the case. I have an obligation to help, even if it's by way of giving you a loan that you're going to eventually have to pay it back. Here it becomes tricky because I lose that particular angle of the transaction. I can give you a gift just like I can give you during the rest of the year, but even if I make you a loan, at some point it's going to become a gift if you're unable to repay it. And so it's really a test of emunah, which is interesting. How does the rest of the Shemitah work? We don't plant, we don't fertilize, we don't do a lot of things. I'll explain to you
You
exactly.
just let it go.
Right, and is that also a little bit of a test of emunah?
Mm-hmm.
Like if I've got a whole vineyard that I planted and tended to for the past 50 years, I'm about to watch all my vines potentially die in order to abide by the Shemitah. Well, in the same way that you could say by Shabbat, you know, if I worked that extra seventh day, maybe I would have a little bit more income. Maybe I could make a few more sales. I could, you know, pay a few more bills. And Shabbat very much is about emunah. So the Shemitah is the Shabbat of the agricultural life cycle, so to speak. One aspect: we're not allowed to plant. We're not allowed to. We're not allowed to sell commercially the produce, the harvest that we collect during the Shemitah year. And that's to say that those who do this without a permissible way of doing it are violating a Torah, a biblical concept. Although it only applies midrabanan right now because the majority of the nation doesn't live in Israel, at least not yet. Always a discussion about one or two more Shemitah cycles, and if assimilation keeps up the way it is currently going at this pace, the majority might already be there. But point number two is that we mentioned the cancellation of loans. So if you have money by the end of the Shemitah outstanding by way of a loan, then it effectively gets biblically canceled. We'll talk about what the Rabbani and Haghim did for this. And we also have this concept of the limitations regarding what we're allowed to plant and not plant. Incidentally, the halachot that apply to the Shemitah apply to Chol HaMoed as well. Whatever you can do in a garden or a field during Chol HaMoed, you're allowed to do during the Shemitah, and vice versa. Same halachot apply. So what can I do during Chol HaMoed? I'm not supposed to be planting, I'm not supposed to be fertilizing, I'm supposed to be dealing with the upkeep, the maintenance of my agriculture. I can water the trees, and then we taught that everything would dry up and die. In Israel, very few species would actually survive if they weren't artificially irrigated, at least not fruit trees. I'm allowed to remove pests, so if it means applying pesticides, they used to smoke, they would burn wood, because insects generally run away from smoke. So I'm allowed to apply smoke. I can apply sprays and creams and ointments and patches and what have you in order to prevent insect infestations, worms, flies, beetles, etc. I'm allowed to water the field. What I'm not allowed to do is to fertilize it. I'm not allowed to prune the trees. I can't do anything that makes them grow faster than the normal rate of soil plus water. That's basically what we're limited to. So other things people do, like pruning, cutting off dead branches, dead leaves, etc., or cutting down trees that aren't really producing the kind of thing that we would just assume not engage in during the Shemitah year. This is all well and good. It sounds a bit idealistic because push comes to shove, life is a little bit complicated. And the reason I don't like to say what John was saying is because I don't want to say the Torah didn't realize life is complicated. Clearly, the Torah prescribes what it prescribes, Hashem knowing full well what life is about. The few that had the merit of living in Eretz Yisrael had a problem. And the problem was that if a Jew is living in Israel, the non-Jews are going to be fertilizing their fields. They're perfectly permitted to, by the way.
They are?
Even if they live in Israel and they own land in Israel, the non-Jews, they're allowed to fertilize it, they're allowed to plant. We'll talk about
They're allowed to fertilize the non-Jews.
their land.
Their
Their plots of land, if you will. Their fields, their orchards, their vineyards, etc.
And is a Jew allowed to work as an employee for a non-Jew in Israel?
Yes,
And
if the land
fertilize
doesn't
the
belong
land.
to you, if the land doesn't belong to you, then you're allowed to work it, yeah. It's specifically the land that belongs to a Jew that's problematic. And even if you were employed to work for the non-Jew, I'm a farmhand on some Muslim farming conglomerate. In theory, I haven't violated the Shemitah because it's not, my land doesn't belong to another.
Now, I thought the whole thing is because it's in Israel. So what difference does it make if it's a non-Jew or not?
Good question. So let's define the problem, and we'll bring up a number of solutions that were brought up because, again, I could do a whole series on this, but this is going to start to apply very soon, and it's the kind of thing that you need to know if you're going to Israel. People are planting things that they shouldn't be planting, and they are selling things they shouldn't be selling. It's an extra kashrut thing to be aware of, aside from the laws themselves, so it's a good thing to know. So what happens is like this. Incidentally, also, this is a biblical concept that applies from Elul, from Tishrei to Elul, as opposed to Nisan. because Nisan is the first month of the biblical calendar. Interesting that there is such a thing as a biblical concept that applies the way Rosh Hashanah begins, because the Torah always counts Nisan as the first month of the year. So, a Jew wants to own land and work the land and produce fruits, vegetables, grains, etc., that he or she will be able to consume and sell and live off of the profits, replant the land and still have something to buy the things that you need. If we're not planting, and we're not fertilizing, and we're not pruning during the Shemitah year, and the non-Jews are, their fruits and vegetables are going to look better, be bigger, they'll have more yield. They're going to outsell us, and ours are going to probably suffer from a number of different, maybe insect infestations if the trees aren't so robust, if the plants aren't so well tended to. The reality is that sometimes we don't get the miracles that we would like to receive, with the divine intervention we would like to have. So what's going to happen is the non-Jews are going to prosper, and the Jewish agriculture will suffer or fail altogether. In which case we depend on the non-Jewish suppliers and whether or not they choose to supply, and if they wanted to create problems back in the day, they very easily could have. They're pretty good at that. They do it in a lot of different ways today. So there was a number of halachic proposals to this particular issue. One halachic proposal, because the Chachamim really are supposed to be looking for solutions and not for problems. One halachic proposal was sell the land to non-Jews and you can continue to work on it. So if I basically create artificially the situation that Yohan was talking about, I own 200 acres of vineyard. I can sell my vineyard to our dear friend Mustafa, and now it belongs to him, and I'm working on his land. Even if it's for a nominal fee, if it's for $5 or something, to pay for the train ticket he took just to come and sign it. Okay, whatever it is. Technically, the land belongs to him. We have witnesses. We made an official legal sale, right? Think Mechirat Hametz, selling the Hametz before Pesach. It's legal, it's binding, it's kosher, secular law, Jewish law, etc. So it resolves the problem of a Jew working on Jewish land during the Shemitah. Any of the produce produced on a non-Jewish farm or on a farm that was sold by a Jew to a non-Jew doesn't have the Kedusha of the Shemitah. It doesn't have the holiness of this Shemitah year, and therefore the fruits and vegetables can be sold for money. There's no restriction on selling them outside of Israel. You can't export the fruits of the Shemitah. So this is one solution. Yeah.
But if the underlying logic is, we're gonna lose. We're gonna lose like importance and the visa actually sustenance against the green. But this is a midrata concept, right? The Shemitah is midrata. So why don't we apply this to Shabbat?
It applies to the midrabanan, but
why don't we apply this to Shabbat? I say if I close my store on Shabbat and the go is open on Shabbat, then I'm gonna lose money.
okay. Did you participate in the shiur on Sunday morning after tefillah?
Yes, but again,
You were tired, but you were there.
it's not as well spread.
At the end of the day, has the problem ever come up before regarding Shabbat and being open on Shabbat? So, has the problem ever been
Yeah.
discussed? So, is there such a thing as a business that can't function without being open on Shabbat, like a factory?
No, there are mechanisms to make it work on Shabbat, but it's not as well spread as the Shemitah. Let's be honest. The Shemitah, everybody agrees. It's Shabbat.
I'll give you a very cheap. I'll give you like a made in China answer. It's that not that many people own factories. Everybody owned land back in the day. So if I have a factory, and in order for my factory to operate, for example, I own a steel mill, okay, and in order for me to heat the furnace in which we melt the different metal elements, might cost me a ton of money, and it might be easier to keep the thing running than to shut it down and turn it on again. In some factories, even a few hours cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars because you have a whole system, you have controls, you have utilities, etc. So these solutions were only devised when people who actually needed them stepped forward and said, look, we have a problem. What's the problem? The problem is that I can't produce or I can't compete. By the way, you know that Mechirat Chametz started this way too? Now it's become fashionable not to do Mechirat Chametz or to, not rely on it. Why would we sell the Chametz that we own on Pesach? Sell it before Pesach. Why would we do this? Where does the Torah talk about selling chametz? It says you can't own it, so you can't see, and you can't see the chametz that you own. Why would anybody, whose mind did it cross first, that we should start selling the chametz to an non-Jew?
People who make their living out of chametz.
So people whose livelihood depended on chametz. No offense, and it's not because I don't like you. David Sasson is going to tell you, who said this is your job? Who said Jews should be working in industries where they need to own a chametz over Pesach? Classic example, you want to open a liquor store. My grandfather, when he came to Eretz Yisrael, it was the first job he got. I was working in a liquor store for Argentinian guys. So it's a very tempting job, especially at certain times of year. So you want to own a liquor store. In order for you to sell liquor, you basically have to own beer and whiskey. And if you'd like to age the whiskey, then you're going to have to own it over the course of not one, not two, but 5, 10, 12, 20, 30 years if you're going to be aging it properly. So by definition, you've had whiskey in your ownership for all these years. How do you circumvent the problem? Well, we could say, tough luck, Jews shouldn't be selling whiskey. And then you've left that industry, there might be families who wanted to do it. It's a potential area of work that Jews won't be able to enter because we haven't found a way. Or we can think halachically, creatively, and find a mechanism that circumvents the problem. Good question, by the way, when it comes to medicine, right? Should Kohanim be doctors? What's the Kohen not allowed to do that everybody else is?
Can't touch a dead body.
I'm going to contact a dead body, be in the same building as a dead body.
You have to do certain autopsy, like in your.
You have to do dissections, right?
Yeah.
So the Kohanim, Moshe Feinstein discusses this, and if you read really carefully, it doesn't sound like he's crazy about the idea of Kohanim being doctors. The question is this permitted? Is it on what grounds? He's not saving any lives now. He'd like to save lives in the future. Okay, maybe these future lives should be saved by Israel or Lewi or someone else. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Kohen doing this. So there are certain things you can say, look, maybe the occupation just isn't an occupation that's especially Jewish per se. Give you another example of this. The Gemara says in Masechet Ketubot that Jewish women have always despised doing laundry, right? And I thought it was just my wife. Generations, thousands of years, Jewish women did not like doing laundry. Why is this? And when I explained it, because Jewish women are modest. And for reasons of tzniut, they did not like to go to the river, which is where they used to wash clothes, think cloth diapers, before they had disposable ones. So who wouldn't want to rub the fecal matter out of a piece of cloth? It wasn't that. It's that they had to pick up their skirts in order to go into the water. And that was considered something other cultures do. As my grandmother used to say, it's not our custom. That's not the kind of thing we're comfortable doing. So you need to go to the river, go ahead, you go off to the side where nobody's looking, etc. They have to hike up your skirt in order to go in. Let someone else do it. There are plenty of volunteers, don't worry. Life will go on even without Jewish laundry women. So, okay, it's an interesting discussion, and the question becomes a more social question. Is this social engineering, what the Torah is guiding us to? Are we really looking for a situation in which we dictate to people which industries they can work in, what places they can live in, etc. So maybe it sounds nice and ideal. Socialists have lots of ideas like this. At the end of the day, there's something to be said for basic human liberties. People will want to work in different things and go to different places. The more you try to control their choices in their lives, the less happy and successful and pleased with you they're likely to be. So it's not so simple. Effectively, the rabbinic response to that wasn't, don't do this, and tough luck, and that's what the Torah says. The response has historically been, we need to find a solution. We need to find a way for this to work, because it's important that there should be Jewish agriculture. You can find plenty of proofs for that concept in the Torah. You don't need to look far to see that the Torah encourages us to plant fruit trees in Israel. It's a discussion if it's a rabbinic, if it's a biblical commandment. So is it just that we're not allowed to eat from it during the first 3 years, or is the actual planting part of the mitzvah? Yes, plant fruit trees in Israel, think Tu B'Shvat, just don't eat from them for the first 3 years. So the ideal, is it ideal that Jews should be living in Israel? Is it ideal that we should establish an economy? Is it ideal that we should be able to make a living and depend one on the other, so that some of us raise animals, some of us grow fruits, vegetables, grains, spices, etc. Others process leather and fabrics, etc. All of a sudden you have a whole economy going. So clearly there has to be some ideal of Jews being able to be self-sufficient in Israel. And if being self-sufficient means you have someone working in pretty much every necessary industry, so owning land and agriculture and inevitably producing wine and probably beer are going to figure somehow into the economy. So solution number one that was proposed was the Heter Mechira, which basically means we permit the sale of land to non-Jews in Israel. When I say we permit, it implies what?
It's usually forbidden to sell.
It implies that it should be forbidden. Normally it is. Only under these particular circumstances do we permit. Why do we permit? What is it that we're permitting? So the Torah tells us that we have a bunch of obligations as they apply to the non-Jews in Israel. One of them is it's asur to sell land to non-Jews. The pasuk that we read, it's a pasuk that appears in many places in the Torah. Lo tehonim is the quote. Lo tehonim, and it's not so clear. Here we're told not to make peace with them, etc. The question is, what does that mean? Lo tehonim, it sounds like in the context of you're supposed to wage war against the idolaters. The ones that aren't idolaters can stay and live in Israel. Lo tehonim, there are three interpretations given by the Gemara. One is lo titen lahem hanaya b'karcha. You're not allowed to, like lachanot, machane is a camp. So you're not allowed to give them a permanent place, a permanent residence, meaning let them own land or buy land in Israel. So if they were there from before, or they purchased the land from a Jew, maybe he sold it, he wasn't supposed to, but now it's a legal sale, then they're already there. It's not thanks to me that that they are currently located where they're located. Maybe they sold one plot and bought another. At the end of the day, they might have access to the land, but the Torah tells you not to sell property. Shmuel Eliyahu from Tzfat made this comment I think a year or two ago. People got all upset, and he said, "Really, we should not be selling apartments to Arabs in Israel. You don't have to like it, but the Torah seems to imply this. Based on this, we hold all three opinions to be halacha. So one opinion is don't sell them land, don't sell them, don't give them a permanent residence that they own in the land of Israel. Opinion number two is lo titen lahem matanat chinam. Don't give them free gifts. So lo tehonim is like chinam. Don't give free gifts like tzedakah, for example. Why? The Torah obligates you to give to Jews that need help. I don't know how many non-Jews line up to help us when we need it. We talk about the righteous Gentiles, they deserve all the credit in the world, but they were not 1% to 1% of the European population. We're talking about a very, very small number of people in what could have been potentially life-saving situations. So how many people actually risked their lives in order to save Jews during the war? Very, very, very few. If it's a few thousand, it was a lot. But it doesn't number in the millions. So your obligations are to help out your brothers and sisters, your co-religionists. Other nations will tend to their own poor. That's the way the world works. If I'm tempted to give to someone else from another nation, not to give to my own brothers and sisters, it's an injustice. Who's going to help me when if my own brothers and sisters don't help? So that's opinion number two. Opinion number three is lo titen lahem hen. This is interesting. Lo tehonim sounds like don't give them hen, don't give them favor or appeal, often used in the context of beauty, like physical beauty. So from here the Gemara says it's asur to look at a non-Jewish man or woman and say, this person is really attractive. I think that's what's behind much of the modeling, fashion, acting industries, TV for the most part. I don't think it's changed. If anything, it's only gotten worse. That basically everybody's looking to employ people who fit the societal norms of what's considered beautiful and promote that, etc. But it's not our job to lust after it, or to even encourage it, or to say this man, that woman, etc. is appealing or attractive. So, lo tehonim, at least when it comes to giving them a permanent hold in Israel, we understand this to be a biblical interdiction. In other words, not only are we not allowed are we commanded to wage war with certain nations, and then to tolerate the presence of others as long as they abide by the 7 Noachide commandments, but there definitely is such a thing as non-Jews living in Israel, as long as they meet those requirements. But we're actually told not even to sell them land in Israel. In other words, the Torah, according to this understanding, the Torah doesn't want land in Israel being sold to non-Jews. So Heter Mechira basically means we're going to uplift this ban on a biblical ban, in fact, on selling land to non-Jews in Israel only for the purpose of enabling agriculture and sustenance during the Shemitah. By the way, I could very easily paint a scenario in which non-Jews decide they're not selling fruits or vegetables or grains or flour to Jews by way of sheer anti-Semitism, could potentially make life very difficult. So it could lead to a situation in which it's literally pikuach nefesh. You have to make sure that people have a way to make a living and to stay alive. So if that were the case, then there should be no issue. Apparently, today, even if that's not the case, I'm sure there are plenty of Turks and Egyptians that would love to sell their produce to Israelis during the Shemitah year. The question is only how ideal is that, or if not, why not? So there are this position has its detractors. At the head of those who promoted it were none other than Rav Yosef Karo, the Shulchan Aruch, and the Beit Yosef. Rav Yosef Karo wrote that this is the custom, this is what's been traditionally done in Tzfat. I see no reason whatsoever to revisit the decision. And I stand strongly and firmly by it. I think this is how it should be done. I think this is what we should do. So if you ask what the Shulchan Aruch says, that's his answer. Yes, technically it's forbidden to sell land to go in Israel. And technically, practically, it's very difficult to make a living without having Jews engaged in agriculture, and they can't do agriculture 6 out of 7 years. It's one thing to work 6 out of 7 days a week. Today, even the Goyim take a break at some point. Or have a non-Jew cover for you on the Shabbatot if it's a really labor-intensive job. But to work in agriculture 6 out of 7 years is just not a viable option. It could be if everybody were on the same boat, but looks like that hasn't been the case for a while. So what we end up with is the Heter Mechira on the one hand. On the other hand, we have what's called Otzar Beit Din. Otzar Beit Din basically means this is it's kind of like a public warehouse purchase on the part of a Beit Din. They basically agree to purchase all the fruits and vegetables and spices produced during the Shemitah year on behalf of whoever would like to buy them afterwards, and they fix a price that's supposed to reflect the costs of producing, packaging, shipping, sorting the produce. So Otzar Beit Din would say, look, during a normal year, pumpkins sell for 3 shekel a kilo. So given that water costs a certain amount of money per cubic meter in Israel, given that it requires a certain amount of gasoline and a certain amount of electricity to run a farm, given that the delivery trucks are going to charge such and such per run, the boxes cost this, the labels cost that, we come up with a situation where we're not exactly we're not selling them for profit. What we're doing is basically selling in such a way that those who are growing the fruits and vegetables are getting a decent price for what they're producing. They can determine their own prices during the 6 years of the 6 non-Shemitah years of the cycle. And during the Shemitah, we're going to carefully supervise what they do. The upshot, the advantage of this particular school of thought is that you get the Kedusha of the Shavuot. These are Jews on Jewish land observing the Shemitah the way it's supposed to be observed. So if the Heter Mechira seems like a runaround, the Otzar Beit Din is basically the Beit Din saying, okay, we're actually going to do this for real. We're going to determine if you want to come collect the fruits and vegetables from your farm, you're entitled to. As we said, figure out how many heads you have in the household and take as much as they can eat over the course of the next 24 hours. In the event that you'd like for us to pick the fruits and vegetables for you, package them, deliver them in large quantities, then break them up into small pieces so you can buy them for less money, we're going to have to charge you something for it. We can't do that for free, obviously. So you do have the advantage of the fruits and vegetables actually having Kedusha. You have the disadvantage of fruits and vegetables having Kedusha, meaning if it has Kedusha, if there's holiness to it, then it's not to be thrown away. Leftover bits and pieces, you can find a way to cleverly compost, but we don't just throw it in the garbage. So even if one of your kids, for example, steps on a plum or something, you don't necessarily throw it out so quickly because it has Kedusha to it.
What do you
Maybe
have to do?
you can compost it, or you can wrap it up in something and then put it somewhere else that should directly hit the garbage because there's Kedusha associated with it. You have a little wine left over in the bottle. It's not so simple how exactly to...
The little drop of wine at the end?
Yeah, but sometimes it has impurities in it that we purposely... people who know... How can you tell someone who knows how to handle a bottle of wine what to do with the last cup? people who are careful with it will pour it very slowly to make sure these impurities don't make it out. Good things to know. If you've done it wrong up until now, you know what to do, make a good impression. So you have to be very careful about not wasting fruits, vegetables, produce, wine, potentially vinegar, fruits produce wine and vinegar, during the Shvi'it. Why? Because it has a kedusha associated with it, and we're therefore not allowed to disgrace it or deface it or waste it. We don't sell the fruits per se as much as we sell the easy access to produce from further away than you're going to go every day, every 24 hours in order to get your meals. So if you want to live off of figs for the rest of the year, you're welcome to come to my farm 7 hours in the Golan Heights, and you can pick as much as you can eat over the course of 24 hours. You'll waste much more money in gas than you'll gain in figs. So the Otzar Beit Din would basically say, look, we take responsibility for these farms and for how the fruits and vegetables are grown. We make sure that it's not done with any machinery or through any methods that are forbidden during the Shvi'it. And we make sure that the fruits and vegetables arrive at a very fair price and with the Kedusha of the Shvi'it associated with them. Downsides, aside from people who don't know what to do with the Kedusha of it, the fact that it can't be exported, needs to be handled a certain way, and that you're trusting the Bedin that they've gone over these agricultural practices, what they approve, what they disapprove of. They would have to be on top of it, educate the farmers as well.
And so are there, so I guess in Israel, like for everything in Israel, when you start with a Bedin, you end up with 20 of them, I guess. So,
Well,
are there, if I go to Israel this year, for a trip or something, and obviously I'm going to buy fruit and vegetable at some point, how do I, what kind of question do we have to ask to understand that the practice is good or not?
It would probably suffice that you ask what type of produce is it, and you're going to get one of three answers. The third one we haven't discussed yet. But Otzar Beit Din is a very calculated thing. Like if you're getting Otzar Beit Din, it's because you want it, and you know exactly what you're looking for. You know exactly what you're getting into.
It's a smaller production, I guess.
I don't know if it's smaller. It's definitely labeled, and it's easy enough for you to figure out. By the way, what do you do with your Shiva Albat Aminim?
Don't you use it
Next year is going to be, we'll be using etrogim that were grown during the Shemitah. So not this year, because this year's etrogim probably started budding before the Shemitah. Next year we're going to have this problem. The question is, how do you handle it? So you'll have the same thing. There will be etrogim that are Otzar Beit Din, etrogim heter mechira, the permitted sale, which was otherwise supposed to be forbidden. And you'll have etrogim that were grown in another country, that were presumably just not Israeli at all. And that's the third option, the one that is most heavily favored by the Haredi community, which is simply don't buy fruits and vegetables from Israel.
Don't buy what?
Don't buy Israeli fruits and vegetables.
Oh.
Buy Egyptian, buy Turkish, buy European, just not Israeli. Which is great. It solves all of the problems, right? In theory, anyway, it solves lots of problems. It doesn't address the point that I was making before to Dawit, that if there is to be a Jewish society in Israel and it's going to require agriculture, and you would like for this infrastructure to somehow grow and succeed, they're going to require some support. The problem is a little bit more complicated when all of your neighbors hate you and want to kill you, and you buy by the megaton cucumbers and tomatoes and oranges, dates, etc. It becomes a little bit more difficult. So here we have competing ideals. On the one hand, ideally it would be great if Jews could sustain themselves in Israel without needing to buy things from outside the country. At the same time, it would be great if everybody knew how to relate to the